next phase is getting into that power position. So you have many extremes. You can have more extreme power position where you get your racket further into that clock. So we're getting into that 6 o'clock phase in that power position.
Now the power position is that point in time just before you begin your hit phase, where you you've loaded up your stroke and you're ready to go and hit that ball. Now a lot of players will get into a different type of position. Me, for example, I was more of the Wawrinka, like getting to that 6 o'clock position here where my racket's facing back. But often it would turn more into a WTA swing, and the WTA, the women's players often get their racket a little bit further back because they hit flatter shots, so they can afford to get the racket further back. They have a more of a linear stroke. The ATP, on the other hand, they don't allow the racket to go back as much, simply because we're handling more speed, and also the game requires more topspin and more angles. Now, when I'm in this position, the reason it turns into the WTA swing sometimes is because, and it's something that I'm working to stop, and if that's what you're finding, it perhaps could help you, is when I'm in that back position, my racket often starts to rotate here. So I start my wrist rotation too early. So I get into my power position, but then my wrist continues rotating and I get into that WTA position without wanting my arm back there. So the important part, that power position, is that place where you can hold the racket before you begin the approach to the ball, before you start to go forward with the butt cap of the racket and the wrist. Make sure that you're not still rotating your wrist here and then starting it, because that then turns into that WTA forehand.
As you can see, when Alex is in that back position, one of the major benefits of reaching that 6 o'clock position is you have now more space to accelerate to the point of contact. You're also stretching the chest muscles when you're in that back position compared to if he was at 3 o'clock. He's now using the chest to have that acceleration forward. But once again, it comes back to timing. If you're someone who's playing on grass courts or fast indoor courts, this 6 o'clock position might not work for you. Then we have players like Roger Federer who get into a position around 5 o'clock. So the racket head, you can see, even though he started his swing with his racket head above, it now starts to drop in that power position. So it ends up in that pat the dog position when he's reaching that power position.
Now the whole difference here is, instead of this, I'm this, and notice my elbow is a little bit more on the right side of the racket rather than being directly behind it. And this will also help with achieving that easy snap where I can go forward with the elbow and actually get that extension here, and this is where a lot of the power will come in. Whereas when you're in this position, a lot of the power will come in simply from the acceleration of your arm from a further back position. So you've got more of a snap, which is more of like a whip effect on the ball, or you've got more of a from the back acceleration through here. And whichever one works for you, obviously play around, but there's different benefits and disadvantages to both.
Now the Wawrinka and Djokovic style, you can see that Alex is using his whole arm, and actually most of the players who use this technique, they have that bent elbow prior to contact and during that contact point. Whereas the players who use more of the Federer swing, they tend to extend the racket out much further. So if you're someone who plays with that extended arm, then you might benefit more from having that 5 o'clock or even 4 o'clock position like a Federer.
Now when you're in that back position, when you get to the 6 o'clock position, for me it feels like there's a little bit less to go wrong. I get here and all I have to do is follow the path of the ball, get the butt cap of the racket forward, and I hit the shot. Whereas if I'm in this position, there's a lot of snap involved, therefore I don't feel as in control. So that technique may require a little bit more practice just for you to get it right, but once you get it right, that's when you can get real benefits from that whip action. So if you are someone that's struggling in framing a lot of balls, perhaps it's time for you to get into more of a 6 o'clock position, more of a Wawrinka, where less will go wrong. All you have to do is swing forward and try and find the timing, try and find the contact. It becomes all about finding contact. Whereas here, if you're someone that's struggling to get power, if you're just kind of pushing the ball, if you've become a pusher without wanting to, then perhaps this is the swing that you should adapt, because now you've got more potential for power acceleration.
The other major benefit of having that Wawrinka style is I can get into that position very quickly, and this is exactly what Wawrinka does. So he gets into that back position, but he does it at very high speeds, and it's very easy for him to change the swing path if he's on a clay court. So a lot of the clay courses will get into that back position like this, because now their forehand is very simple. They're going from the ready position, they're getting that coil, and they're getting that racket set up. From here, all they have to worry about is now making contact, and it makes that forehand much simpler and much easier for you to time if you can get it back on the right spot. Now we also have players like Fabio Fognini and Berrettini who have a different swing, but they still achieve that kind of, they're getting into a power position ready to then come forward.
Now someone like a Berrettini, he doesn't have a full circular swing like some of the other players do. It's more of an oval swing, but he still gets back into that position here, and then the racket actually ends up traveling all the way back, and he gets more into like a Murray. Andy Murray gets into that position before the stroke, where the racket's completely back at this point, and then he's pulling forward with that back cap, with the back part of the hand. So he gets into here, oval shape, back, through. And again, it generates a lot of power. He cuts down the time on his swing because he's not doing the loop, but he may also struggle on those higher balls if he's pushed back with such a low backswing.
Then we have a player like Fabio Fognini who has a loop, but he has a much smaller loop. So if we think about Federer's loop, he might have a full loop. If we think that's one full circle, then Fognini will have a similar kind of style, but he'll do it in that 50% range, so half of the swing of someone like Federer. Now the major advantage is he can then step in and take the ball on the rise and use the opponent's pace to then redirect play.
If you think about a smaller swing, the smaller the swing, the less can go wrong. The closer you are to contact before you hit the shot. So if again you are one of the players that makes a lot of mistakes, so you're framing the ball, you can't find the contact, reducing that backswing will definitely help you. Getting a bigger backswing will give you more power, but then you sacrifice that bit of timing and that control on the ball because you're having to travel quite far back, and don't forget there's a moving object towards you and a moving object from the way back with your racket. So those two meeting at the same point, you have to get good timing. It requires a lot of practice. Now with a shorter backswing, because you can step in, you can actually handle balls, you can take balls on the rise a lot more, you can take them earlier, and you're much closer to contact, so it becomes a little bit more comfortable for the player. probably seen a lot of videos on the lag and the hip part of the swing. So what do we mean by wrist lag? It means that the racket head is traveling behind the wrist, the butt cap of the racket is pointing towards the oncoming ball, and from this position now, the arm goes forward while the racket lags behind. It's the hand goes first, the wrist goes first, the butt cap goes first, and then the back of the racket, the racket head comes second.
Now, to achieve this, you want to do it in a relaxed way. A lot of players, they focus so much on the lag, they end up forcing this position, and once again that creates that tightness, that tension in the muscles, and the muscles won't fire as explosively as they can. From this position, as you start that uncoiling phase, and if you've loaded up on your legs, this actually happens quite relaxed, quite naturally, because from here, now if I want to keep my wrist and my racket head in one line, I have to be tight. If I uncoil, if I start that opening of the shoulders, from this position you can see how this actually happens quite naturally without me forcing it. So the more you work on that coil, which comes back to that first step, the more you work on that coil, uncoil, the better you'll get at creating that racket lag.
Now the racket lag starts from the ground up. So even though my racket is here, my body goes first. So I'm doing this with my hips first, then my body, then my arm, my elbow, my wrist. So it's from here that it starts. It's very difficult to create racket lag just by doing it from the arm. So make sure you're working from the ground up. If you're struggling to create that easy power, that easy snap on the ball, you're probably not loading and you're not probably using your hips enough to hit the shot with. You're trying to do it with your arm, and you're never going to achieve the same power if you do it that way.
Now in this lag phase you can have different positions with both the strings and your hand. Some players like Federer and Nadal, they'll have the arm extended almost into that straight arm position. Other players like Djokovic, Wawrinka and many other players, they'll have this bend in the arm. Now also you can play around with the angle of the strings. When you close the strings more in this lag phase, it will make it easier for you to produce more topspin. If you want to hit a flatter shot, you want to keep the strings in that more side-on position, so neutral, and this will allow you to really hit through that ball, extend towards your intended target.
Still go.